share my screen. You can see that. All right, so what we're covering today, I'm going to put this in the chat so you can follow along. So this is the GitHub repository we're going to be using today to do a demo, because I normally do live demos for all my sessions. So that's the link in the chat. We can get started. Let's get rid of the screen. So what we're going to be building out today is very simple. We're going to be looking at a live scenario where we have a end user who's trying to come in and use Azure. So basically, it's our client, and we want to onboard them into Azure for the first time. Some of the requirements they're looking for is to be able to build a way to ingest data into our system. So we're going to build out every single component here. So we're going to build out a secure FTP site, a place to store the files as they get uploaded into our environments. We're going to build out a couple of Azure functions, which actually allow us to actually pick the files up and get triggered along the way so they can get put into our SQL database. We're going to also build a service bus because we're going to take the data and chop it up into manageable sizes so we can put it into a service bus and then end up putting the database. And then what we're going to do is expose an API, so we allow the users who actually requested for this work to be done to actually be able to inspect the data to make sure it's good, right? So it's an end-to-end solution we're providing. There are some previous recordings here. I haven't updated this recently. I have some new ones. Pretty similar, but you can go to the most previous recordings here and look at these. Some of the features that we're actually going to be building out today are on par with most of the actual resources out in Azure today. So we're going to be able to do things like this is the solution we're building now. We'll be able to do data integration. We'll be doing some ETLs and data orchestration. We're going to be spinning up some serverless SQL pools so we can actually handle the ingestion load because we're going to be moving a lot of files into Azure. We're going to be doing having a connector into a storage account so we can actually track what load we're ingesting. And we're going to have the support for ETL into Azure and ELT out of our backend database. We wanted to do that as well. Programming languages are going to be T-SQL and .NET. And then we're going to be showing some of the capabilities of Azure, meaning that we can scale as needed. So we're going to do elastic scaling, which means that we'll just automatically scale as needed to handle the load. We're also going to have the capability in SQL to be able to scale our storage as well as our CPU as needed to handle the amount of ingestion data that we'll put into our system. We're going to do integration into Azure services. We're going to be showing that as we go along. And this is the part I mentioned. We're going to be taking our data in large sizes and moving them and slicing them and transforming them into Azure systems. Some of the orchestration features that we do support will have event-based triggers, which will allow us to pull data off as it gets enhanced into our storage account. And all things like integration to ML, we're not going to cover that today. The web-based part, we're going to cover that today. So some of these things we're going to actually cover today as well. So but most of the stuff here, like RBAC, VNet integration, we're going to leave that out for another time. If you have the link, you can go in here and look at the different ingestion solutions out there and how you can ingest through Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Break if you used it before, Synapse, and also what we're building out today. So these are the steps we're building out: the SQL database, service bus, API functions, a couple of other things. And most of the stuff we're building out today, if you are new to Azure, are going to be free. So that's one of the reasons why I'm focusing on free resources. So if you want to build your own end-to-end solution, you can build your own out. Some things to note before we get started. Just scroll the way down to the bottom here. Is that getting started is important. So if you're new to Azure and you want to get started, I recommend go to this link, click on it, and then you can actually go in and you can look at the pricing offerings that they have. It's going to show up in a minute. Oops, put the site down. Oh, okay. It's interesting. They normally have the pricing right here. Oh. Normally you have the pricing over here, but maybe this sign up. Oh, the pricing, how much things cost. Maybe they're modifying the site. But basically the site normally should have the pricing out of here. Normally would do have a $200 credit at the top, but it looks like it's still in Let's see. Free Azure services. Maybe that's what it is. I'm looking for. There we go. All right. So I'm sorry, they probably had a link, extra link up here. That's the reason why I didn't see that. So this is the free services that you have. Update my link to reflect your new location and where they put it. Some of the free services you get, which I mentioned, that we're going to be using Azure Functions, Hub Services. We're going to be using things with databases, blob storage. So all these things are technically free for 12 months, and you do get a 30 days. You get 30 days at the credit which you have, which Microsoft gives. I think it's still $200 that they give you for credit. Now, once you've signed up and you want to, you go to the account, it looks something like this. I've already authenticated inside of here. You should see something that looks like this. You'll be asked to authenticate once you have a username and password, or in this case, if you have a domain that you want to authenticate with, which will land you here. If you go to your subscriptions, that's kind of like a default landing place where everybody has at least a subscription. Then inside the subscription, you have resource groups, which is basically how things are set up. Then inside of those resource groups is where we're going to have resources. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be creating a brand new resource group in here for what we're trying to deploy today. And we're going to put some resources in this guy here. And then we can walk through what these resources mean as we go along. Now, if you're not familiar with GitHub, it's pretty straightforward. If you're a developer of any type, you'll be familiar with GitHub. This contains the README file, which is shared here, and also contains the code itself. You can actually download the code yourself if you wanted to. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of, it's boilerplate code. There's not a lot of code in here to actually play with. So even if you're a C# developer, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. You can actually use it. And then what you can do is that when you actually, if you want to download the code directly from GitHub, you can actually fork the code. You can create a local code space. This costs money, by the way. You only get a certain amount for free, and after that, you have to pay for it. Or you can go traditionally where you actually just download it locally to your machine using HTTP GET, or you can actually install your GitHub desktop on your machine or visit your code, which is what I did, and then you can put it down locally. Now, when you check out or clone it, it looks similar to what I have over here. Let me close this. I'll just do some changes to look similar to this. So this is just me pulling it down. I'm using dark mode on my VS Code. And just pulls it down here. So if you haven't used VS Code before, I think if you haven't used VS Code before, I jumped the gun here. But if you haven't used VS Code, there's another link here which I provide inside of my README. If you go down to the VS Code section here, or the community edition, you can actually download a copy of VS Code. And that will give you the link to download VS Code if you need a copy of that, and that you should have that here. So recommendations, go through the README files and see what there is in there. Once you download the code, this is what it looks like. It's very simple. And what we do is that we actually need to add 2 additional extensions to your VS Code once you download it. The first thing is you have to add in is an Azure sign up, Azure sign in, Azure account, which allows you to authenticate into your Azure environments. Once you do that, once you download the extensions, it looks something like this. Once you sign in my case, I believe I already signed in already, you will get a list of services here. Now you need another extension called function apps, because we're going to be using function apps today. So you can do a function app. You should get Azure function, which is now what we're going to be we download. And what that does is that when you go in here and you go over here, you get an option to actually go through the wizard to actually create and add it. And you also have the option to build it. So all that being said now, assuming that you already have an account, I'm just going with the assumption you have an account here and want to start getting going. You have all the prerequisites in place, so we're going to start getting going, and you downloaded the code. The first thing you got to do is deploy it into this environment, right? So that's what we're going to do, right? So when you come into VS Code and you right click, and I'm going to choose the advanced option. Let's get rid of this. And in the advanced option here, what allows us to do is allows to create your function app for the first time. So this is brand new in your resource group. Now, the beautiful thing about using VS Code is that it walks you through a wizard. It's an 8-step wizard, and it walks you through it. We advise you to use the wizard because actually it's a nice getting started if you want to get into Azure. And then you have to create a globally unique function app, right? So that's what we're going to do today. So I want to go with training 2024. Today is 10th, and I'm going to go with 16, which is today's date. So I'm going to keep that. It's going to see what's available. Now they give you options here. What kind of plan you want to host it on? Like hosting basically means what kind of physical server they want to host it on. We don't own it, Microsoft does. So it's just giving us different types of physical servers that you can possibly put it on and how they're going to be used. A consumption plan is actually interesting because it allows you to create multiple instances of a same machine in a horizontal manner, meaning that you just add machines on as you need more resources versus adding new hardware. So that's why we're going to choose a consumption option. Now, locations are important. Depending where you live, you want to be something close to where you live. In my case, I'm in East US 2. So that's why I've chosen to put my physical server that I've been putting in. Microsoft is going to provision for me. I'm using .NET, .NET 8, which is going to be used, going to be running on Windows. We're going to be creating a new resource group, which we talked about before. We're going to keep the same name. Oops. Let me get rid of that. Hit the word create resource group. Keep the same name. It's going to ask us to create a place where we're going to deploy the files, which is very important. So we're going to keep the same name as well. So create that storage account, keep the same name. And the last one is going to ask us for, which is to create a application insight. So what application insight does is allows us to track the behavior of our application as we're using it in real time. We're going to keep the same name. And what this is doing now is that based on all the things I've chosen, I'll go back into my portal. It should at some point create, if everything goes well and there's no issues, it should create a resource group, which has done here, 2024, 10/16. And then in here, you should have resources and going to get start dropped in here one at a time. Now, obviously, these things can be scripted out in Terraform or Biceps, depending which one you want to do. But because this is a demo, we're going to just do this manually. Let's try again. If you notice, there's a plan here, which I mentioned. And this plan basically is the physical operating system, which just tells us basically what version of the operating system we're using. In this case, we chose Windows. And inside of that plan, you have the function app, which is about to get deployed. So we have a couple of things coming in. This is almost finished. Okay, so that's successful. So if I refresh now, a minute. Sometimes it takes a while for it to actually register here. There we go. So we do have an Azure function here. And this is where all our function apps are going to be again deployed. So when we go back to our documentation here, I'm going to scroll back up, expand this out. All these light bulbs you're seeing here that looks like lightning bolts. These are all our functions that are going to be operating, and that's what we're deploying right now. So now that we have this here, if we refresh, we should see, this works correctly, we should see a function here. There we go, right? And there are two ways to do our deployments, right? So in Azure, Microsoft offers you two ways to do deployments. You can do it through your machine, which is you can just deploy from your machine directly, or you can go through the GitHub repository and pull that version and push it into your code base, right? So if you go into this is the code itself. If I go into Microsoft.azure.com, Microsoft offers this thing called a deployment. And then you have a deployment center here. And if you want to do it from the portal into your GitHub repository, then you can also do it there. Microsoft offers the option here. So you can actually click here. And because we already have a checked in piece of code, we can actually just choose the Git. And if you're authenticated through your portal.azure.com into your GitHub repository, you can actually select the organization you want. You can select the actual repository you're looking to put in here. I have a bunch in here, but you can actually select the right one. So we'll have one for, which one are we doing today? Ingestion into Azure NoSQL. Is that the one? Sure, make sure it's right. It's the changes to Azure starts SQL, not the SQL. I can see that's the reason why. That's correct. So that's the right one. So I want to make sure I pick the right one. They choose master because that's what we want to have. We're in .NET 8. It creates a identity for us. We can preview the file, which is good. And what this is doing is creating just a entry level out of the box YAML file, which is going to use to try to deploy our applications for us. So you can close that. We can save it. And what that's doing is going to try to push it into our GitHub repository and try to do a build. So if we come back here, we do a quick refresh, it actually ties this into our repository. So now we have a kind of like a starter point. So you can, if you want to start a YAML file, you can go in and edit it, make additional changes to it. In this case, if I want to make an additional change, I need to, because this is not my default directory, I want to make some changes to it. I can actually go in and make changes to it. So I want to start it over here, because this is where my code lives. So this is what Microsoft gave me. I'm just making one more change to it because I know that my code lives here. This is all I got to do. So it's like I just made a quick minor change. And then what you should do is deploy a code into Azure for us. Now, obviously, the first time it runs, you can see your workflows that go to my actions here. If you use GitHub before, you can use actions. It tells you what is running, what is breaking, what's successful, and it keeps it going here. So these are basically workflow runs, they call them. And you can actually use this to deploy it from your environment into Azure. And once you set this up one time and you do additional check-ins, automatically get deployed into your environment. So I'll keep that going, let that keep going, and we'll come back and revisit that. So inside of our resource group right now, we have a couple of resources. So we have function app, which is getting deployed. The actual code is getting deployed right now. We create a managed identity, which is basically an identity that we use to authenticate to some of the devices we're going to be using. And then we have log analytics workspace and application insights, which we're monitoring our APIs, right? So we're going to come back and look at these. But if we go back to the documentation, we want to be able to create a couple of more things, right? So the functions are in place, storage accounts already out there. We're going to focus on the actual service bus here. The service bus can handle all our messages. And then we're going to build the database next. So we're going to create that. Now, the way Azure works is that it's a marketplace like anything else. When you create a button inside of your resource group, it takes you to the marketplace. You have to kind of do similar to what you would do inside of your Google or iPhone, where you have to search for the app you're looking for. In this case, we're looking for Service Bus. It's pretty intuitive. It will actually try to help you find it very quickly. And in this case, we're going to click the first one that shows up. Hit create. And Microsoft does a very good job of putting pricing in front of you. So as you use this wizard and you walk through each step, it will put pricing in front of you. We're going to keep the same name, training. Let's see what is available, 2024, 10/16. It looks like it is. East US 2 is the location I chose. So I'm going to stick to that. The pricing tiers, it was here. If you are in a corporate environment, I recommend using the premium because you have no limits. The rest of them, or the rest of the two down here, do have caps. So for the one I'm going to choose, I do have 12.5 million messages I can send over a month's time. So I'm going to hit those thresholds, but this is a demo and that's fine. But if you choose the more expensive one, which is about $600, you have no caps at all. So you can actually keep sending messages all day long. Geo-replication is only enabled for premium. So if I choose premium, you see that this box gets checked. You can actually go in and set it up. I have to set it up here, but you can, depending on where you live, you can actually choose the replication option that you want to choose. But for standard, you don't have a choice at all. Let's go next. We're going to keep the TLS. Networking, we're going to keep public for now because we don't have a network to add to it yet. And then tags are important. The tags always ensure that you can get billing right. So there's a cost center that will be attached to this so your department can pay for the resource. And then we go next. And finally, we're doing the validation and we can create. So this is getting created right now. So we have 1 out of 2 getting created. And then we can go in and create the database once we have that out there. So I go back to the resource group, hit create again. We're going to create the SQL database, right? So that's the next thing. Go back to our documentation. We have to create the SQL database, which is next. So we have the service bus being provisioned. We're going to create the SQL database now. Go back to our marketplace. Should go Azure SQL. We're picking the first one. We're gonna hit create. Same exact flow as the service bus. You always get a wizard, which is nice. Microsoft tries to keep things consistent. But the difference is that you get three flavors, right? So you can bring your own from on-prem. So if you're coming from on-prem, you want to get into Azure as quickly as possible. Microsoft has a nice path forward, right? They actually give you the option to select the type of Windows server you want and the type of licensing on the SQL environment they're using on-prem. It will build the database, to build a server and put SQL on there, and you can bring your own license as well if you wanted to go this route. Uh, the only thing you pay for is the physical VM, right? If you go to the Azure, if you have your own license. This one here is slightly different. Microsoft actually owns it. They actually own the, because it's called a managed instance. They manage the instance, they provision the instance. You just bring your database and your license. So you don't have RDP into this one. You have RDP here, you don't have RDP here. This one is actually a native. They call it native. That means Microsoft actually doesn't even give you the option to create your own instances. You create the database and then you have to configure it so you can scale as needed. So this is the one I'm going for, which is basic because and it's quick to push out. If you built SQL databases before, they take hours. Sometimes it can take an hour and a half or maybe an hour to get it all set up correctly. In this case, we're going to get it done as soon as possible. So here we're going to create a database. We're going to call it train. I think I have it pasted in here. And then because we don't have a server, we need to create the database has to reside on the server. We have to go and choose, in this case, choose the server that we're going to use. Keep the location the same, ECS2. Yeah, ECS2. And then the one thing you have to pay attention to here is that there's the authentication options, right? So then put the database name here first. The authentication options here would be to use your intro ID or what it was previously called Active Directory. You can use Active Directory and SQL, or you can use SQL. In this case, since we're not using any of the intro stuff, we're just going to create a username and password to keep things simple. Okay, so that's done. So now that we have a database provisioned, or at least provisioned and ready, we need to actually configure the database, right? So we need to tell this the wizard, we need to point out what option we want. Now, if you don't choose one, Microsoft chooses it for you, and the default is basically this. This is default here. You have two physical servers replicated to each other. One is a primary and one is a replica. Similar to what you have on-prem, so you have the active, or you have that always on solution. So Microsoft actually does by default creates that for you, so you don't have to worry about that. If you don't like what they have out of the box, you can actually go and choose some other options. So in this case, and then if you decide to go with the default and you want to increase your core sizes, you can get up to 80 cores and up to 450 gig of memory. So you can actually come in and slide this as needed, depending on how much use you're using. So if you find that later on you're using too much, maybe you're hitting your limits, you can come in and slide it. And even if you're in a production environment, the workloads actually will be re-provisioned in real time. So what we're choosing here is what we call standard budget friendly. I recommend that if you're starting out. And the reason why is that you can see the price changed here to $14, right? So if you're a small shop, you just want to get into SQL, maybe you're trying to do some small ingestion, you're ingesting data, maybe you're doing a little bit of data science work and you're just trying to get into that space. I'll recommend go with it out of the box because they're doing light data. And as you ingest more data, you can actually increase the size of your DTUs. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm increasing max to 200 because the reason why is because we're going to be moving a lot of data for this demo. So that's the reason why I'm increasing it. Hit apply. The two things here is that you need to take into consideration is backup storage redundancy. I recommend setting this up if you're in the production environment. So you have point in time restore, which is normally inside of 5 minutes, meaning that if your database went down, you can go back 5 minutes and you'll lose 5 minutes worth of data. That's kind of the out of the box feature that comes with Microsoft. Then you have the long-term retention, which basically tells you how long do you want to retain your backups after you store them. A year, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years is up to you how you want to do it. And then you have the options here of what kind of storage capacity or redundancy you want in this case. So local redundant is what everybody's used to, right? You have a data center, then you have a backup in the data center itself. So you have two copies of your data in the same location. And zone redundant actually means that you can have two different zones in the same location. So you have one in maybe in Virginia, and you have another location in another location in Virginia, and they have zone redundancy. So if one data center goes down, you have another data center that's backed up in the same region, you can actually fall back to the second one. And geo redundancy is what the default is, reason, because if a region goes down, meaning the whole of the East Coast goes down, you can go to central or north as your backup. So out of the box, we're choosing that. We can go with next security. And we'll just keep the defaults here for now. Additional settings, we're going to keep that for now. Tags are always a thing. You always get things around tagging. That's because they want to make sure that they capture the cost of the resource and tie it into a cost center. And we create this one. All right. So we're doing a lot of setting up here because obviously the whole point of this demo is to make sure that the resources that you're interested in using, you have some kind of idea how to set that up in Azure. So we do have a couple of things deployed out here. I can go back in here and check our workflow. That was green. Obviously, this didn't pass. This is green, this passed. So let's see whether our resources got provisioned successfully. If I go into Azure function here, if everything was successfully provisioned, I should see a nice list of functions. So that has either not deployed or is still deploying, one of the two. Let's go to my deployment center. Let's see whether we have any failed deployments. We might have one failed one. Actually, this was successful. This failed, this was successful, this was successful. So why don't we have any functions out here? We did a delay. Interesting. Let's do a refresh. There should be something up here. I'm not sure why there isn't one. Give me a second, just checking activity logs. Yes, that was published. This was connected. The site was created, so maybe there's a delay somewhere. I don't know why that's not happening. But we should see and this is interesting about live demo, so we should see what went well. We should see some operators down here, but I'm not seeing those. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing these here. Functions are listed. Interesting. Functions. SQL database is deployed. Yeah, it's very difficult when you can't see. All right, so let's work blindly for now. So, all right, so let me see if I can refresh and see what comes up here. Because the browser is not showing me what I need to see, but that's fine. And let me see whether the site is up. Okay, site is up. So that at least it's good the site is up. So deployment was successful. The only thing we're not seeing the actual list of functions here, the operators here, that could just be a blip on the actual site itself. So the next thing we need to do is set up the environment variables. So if I go into my documentation here, I'm going to scroll down to this section here. This is the part I'm going to set up. So we're going to set up a couple of things here. I'm just going to grab things and go along the way here so we can connect the dots. And the whole point is I want to connect this Azure function to our service bus and connect it to our SQL database so we can start pushing information to that. So I'm going to set up the config path. That's going to be config, and I will show you how we're going to use that later on. And we're going to go in and set up the key name. We're going to add that in. And the app key name is XAPI key, which is what we're going to be using to in our API later on. And then we're going to keep going. Come from that one. Then we're going to have the app name, which is just going to be a way to query information through application insights so we can see what transactions are going through our APIs. So we can call this, we need that 1016, like that. Let me go and get the storage account name is already available. Just going to copy that one over there. That's already there already. So that's already been installed here. So we're just going to refer to it. We add that in there. And we can actually just copy the one as in here. Kept the name the same, so it's easy to just copy and paste it inside of here. And then we can go to the next one. Now, this service bus connection string we don't have right now because we just provisioned a brand new service bus while we're on this call. So I have to go and get that information. So I'll keep this window open. Put on my instance of this so I can actually look at it. Close that. And then I can go into my resource group and grab the connection string for the service bus, which you just provisioned, right? So this is the service bus. Now, service bus, interesting. The service bus, when you go into the settings and you expand it, there's a thing called a shared access policy. That's basically what the connection string is. And then inside of here, you can grab the actual connection string, which is what we want. And we go back into our function, we paste that. So we have that now. And then if we go back into our documentation, we can grab the database, add that in. Again, we don't have the database itself, so we have to go and get that information as well. So we're going to log in and get that information. We'll go back to our resource group, go back to our database. Now, if you notice, Microsoft provisioned a SQL Server, which is that one, and you have a SQL database, which is what we care about. And in database, we normally have a connection string. And you do have a query editor, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. So we're going to grab the connection string here. Because we didn't use the actual Azure intro or Azure Active Directory, we're using our password. We're taking the second ADO connection string instead. So we paste that in here. And then we can go in and we'll make the necessary changes to put the password in. And we should be good. So close that, apply that, and then go back to documentation. This timer interval is going to be used later on to actually for the CQFDB piece. I will show you when we're using that. Let's close that. We're going to add that in. And we also need to add in the timer. The timer here we're taking is just for the first minute. So we're going to add that in here. And we're applying that. So now we have all the stuff. We go back to the documentation. We should be all done here. So this piece is completed. So I can hit save. And this is how you add this. Now you can actually automate this process through a CI/CD pipeline. This is just basically app settings or web config. If you're in the development world, this is similar to that. And if we go back to documentation, we're gonna have to upload all these config files. So this is what's gonna help us orchestrate our movement of our data. So this is self-described here. One is gonna upload the files. You can see some of these descriptions are here, so you can actually go in and look at it yourself. But we're gonna move over to the storage account, which is the next. So we looked at a function app. We're done with that now. Go back into our resource group. And now we're going to go to the actual storage account itself, which is down here. And this is we're going to spend a little bit of time in here. So if you've never used Azure storage accounts before, it's very simple. They have a couple of flavors of offerings. They have a container, which is basically where our triggers happen. So containers are almost like a live location of where files are. Microsoft constantly monitors activities inside of a container. So if you want to trigger any kind of event of any file drop, the trigger a container is where you want to put your files in. So we're going to create one in here called config. So that config that you saw earlier on when I was putting in the function app, this is what we're going to do here. Then in here, we're going to upload the actual files that we have here. Actually, I'm going to make a change quickly before I do that because I'm not using intro. Let me get this issue. So let me come out from here and go into my what's it called? The configuration. In my configuration, I want to turn off intro because we're not authenticating with intro. So I can save that. Let's get out of the way first. So now I can go back to my containers. That error should go away. And now I can actually go in and upload my files. Now my files are located here in VS Code. So I just need to open the path to where these files are. And I can grab them. So I'm going to grab this location. This is where we're uploading our files. Up here, upload. And we can walk through the actual each file, what each file represents. Then from there we can start. We can start doing testing. So let me just upload these. We'll come back to this in a minute. I want to make sure I configure everything properly first. Upload. That was successful. So we have the config created here. Documentation, files have been uploaded. We need to create 3 containers. I already created 1. I'm going to create the remaining 2. And then go back to my documentation. I have to create another one called processed. Create another container here, processed. Then I'm going to create tables. Now this is now probably going to create a couple of tables here. So I'll go back here. We're going to move over to the table section. I'm just going to switch to the Storage Explorer browser, which is similar to this. And here we can create new tables in here as well. So we're going to create the first table, which is going to track all our CSV files that have been batched. And I'm going to create another table, which is going to create store and NoSQL data. So we're going to move in 2 pieces of data, SQL and NoSQL data. So we're going to create a table here. And we call that 2024 1016. All right, so that's done. And then we go back to the documentation. We have to create a share as well. So this is where the SQFTP drops are going to happen. So we create a share. And the good thing about using shares in Azure is that Azure gives you 100 terabytes by default. So if you're moving large amounts of files from on-prem into Azure, this is the way to go, right? 16. So you get like 100 terabytes up to 200 terabytes, I think, and you request more if you need up to, I mean, if you need more space, which is a significant amount. If you're moving a large amount of files, you can move them into a file share, which is good. Now, the backup by default is enabled. Microsoft, you have to go in and disable it if you need to. And what happens is that it's creating a backup and the backup daily for you. So you have to have point in time restore will be a day. So that's going. So these 2 have been created. Now, if I go back to the documentation, let's hide this. Go back to our documentation here. So the next thing we're going to do is move over to the actual service bus. So the service bus, because the service bus is actually going to be taking out messages because it's a messaging pattern. We're going to go over there and I'll show you that in a minute. Let's open up another window because we're going to come back and see these windows individually. Close that, close that. So now resource group, we're going to go back to a service bus, right? So we looked at it, we looked at the storage account, and we're looking at the service bus. The service bus basically is similar to queues. Like if you've done any kind of MSMQ, WebSphere, any of these things, any messaging queue, they do support queues, which is typically your first in, first out. Single message, single subscriber. Um, Topics actually allow you to have single messages, single endpoint to receive a bunch of messages, and multiple subscribers to take the messages off. Some of the benefits of using a topic over queues is that you want to send the data to two different locations. Maybe you want to go to a NoSQL and SQL database, which is what we're going to be doing. You can actually create two consumers that can consume the same data at the same time. So you don't have to wait for one to finish. You can consume the data at the same time. So that's one of the huge benefit. So the way topics works is that you have to create somebody to create something to receive the messages. And if you go to our documentation, we call that a request. So we're going to go back here, add that in. Default size, meaning the amount of messages it can hold, 1 gig. The time is going to take to keep them. If no one picks them up, 14 days before it gets rid of it. We keep the defaults. Once the topic has been created, now we're going to have to create consumers. So they have to have consumers that we have to create some consumer groups or consumers or subscribers in this case that are going to be pulling the messages off. So we have two subscribers here. We have one for NoSQL and we have another one for SQLs because we're going to be moving two pieces. We're going to be moving into two separate databases today. On the subscription side is slightly different. So what it tends to do is that it's going to try to deliver the message 10 times before it gives up. It's going to hold the message for 14 days if no one is picking it up. And then if a message fails after 10 times, it's going to move into the dead layer and keep it there for another 14 days. So you're looking at a total of, if it fails immediately, it's going to be 14 days here. So either way, it's 14 days in either of the two. And then you have an opportunity to actually go in and investigate and find out why the messages wasn't successfully delivered. So there's a way of tracking it. If you, in most production environments, they actually look at the dead layer to see whether any messages moved into the respective subscribers. So we have to create two of those, right? So we have to go back to our documentation. We're going to create one for SQL. And same thing, keep the defaults. And we should be good to go here. All right, so these two have been created. So let's go back to the documentation. What else we have to do? Now, the rest of these we're going to come back and revisit. Set up the SQL FTP. After we do a sample test, we can come back and review this. We can set these up. Let's go back to our storage account. So this is set up. This is set up. The one other thing that we need to do is that because we are actually going to be working with a SQL database, I've actually provided in the that repository in GitHub some tables which are going to be created inside of Azure, right? So because we're going to be moving data, we need to have at least a schema for a relational database. So in our relational database here, one of the things that you need to be careful of is that when you actually go in for the first time and try to authenticate, because we chose no access, if I try to authenticate, Maxim is going to say, well, you don't have access to authenticate because you're publicly denied. So we have to fix this problem, right? So we have to add ourselves to the firewall. It's a good way to prevent unauthorized access. So I'm going to have to find out what my IP is. Let me do it in a minute. Just checking what my IP address is. That'll come up in a minute. Then what you can do is that they have a firewall setting here, which allows you to add your local IP address, right? So this is disabled. If you're in a network environment, you normally add it to a virtual network. So where your corporate network will actually be added here. Then that way that anybody who's logged into corporate network via maybe a VNet or VPN can actually get access to it. We're allowing services, we're allowing Azure services, meaning that Azure Function can communicate with this. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding a firewall rule. Let me just add this one. It doesn't like IPv6. That hasn't come into place yet. So And this, I just want to change this here. Doesn't like it because it's IPv6. And once I change that and add it in, there go my IP address, and I can save that. So now I should, in theory, have access to be able to go back in authenticate. So I close this, close that. See, go back to my databases here. Go back to my database. And what I can do, I try to authenticate here one more time, see what I can get in. Last time I couldn't get in because I was denied access. Hopefully I should be able to get in. All right, so now I'm in here now. I can go and run this script, which I need to do my test case, right? So yeah, I'm gonna execute that. And that's ran. So we should have no tape, we should have no records in there. I'll come back and check that. So now we've got all everything set up now. The final thing before we do our test is just to make sure that all our files are good in the config. So I'm gonna just walk through that and then we can do our initial test case. Let's open that up because I need that. Okay. One place. Let's share. I want to go to my containers, go into my config. And these are the files that we're going to be you're going to be used to orchestrate our data. So basically, this is when we're doing the CQFTP. Some other things that we've already created here. I created a container. We already changed the dates to reflect the file share name. Created a file share already. And the type of files we're going to be working with is going to be CSV files today, right? So that's the main focus here. Save that. What's the next one? Just create a NoSQL database. We're using we already created the table already for that. Save that. I love this config files already in the documentation as well. If you want to read up on it as well, what each one does. Uploading a file. We're actually going to split in our batch sizes. So we get a million records, we're going to split it up into 200 records each, including the header, which is 201. And that's how we're going to be managing it over the service bus. So we can move a lot of files very quickly, but we have to split them. So this is the what we're going to do it. Over here, edit that. This is to search the NoSQL database. Once we have the files in there, we can do a search, and then we can pull the files out. Save that. Service bus trigger, this is one that takes the files, puts it from service bus, and we're going to be putting into our database we just created in our database, in our SQL database. Oops. And then what do we have here? It's JSON. Well, I'm not going to do much with this one today. Let's save that. On to the next one. This is the blob trigger. This guy handles taking the data and then putting it onto our service bus. So we're going to see that today as well. Yeah, that's saved already. And then here we're going to look 3F here. This is for our NoSQL table. So this is taking it off the service bus and then putting it into our database in batches of 100. And then we'll connect our database, do a simple search. This is to get reports. If we have time, we'll do some reporting, some Power BI reporting if we have some time. This is the initial test we're gonna do. So when we start out, we're gonna upload a file into our system and just do an initial sanity test to make sure that we can actually get the data into our backend system. And we'll walk through this process. This is the first initial test we're gonna do. and see what that looks like. And this is for encoding a message for reporting. And the remaining two are for, this is for our liquid template. So liquid template is a way of doing transformation. We can do transformation in real time. If we have time, I'll show this as well. How transformation actually works when we use a liquid template. Okay. And this is HTML version of how we can take a data and convert it to HTML in real time for reporting as well, if you have any kind of reporting options. All right, so I think that's all the setup we have. Now, if you've never used Postman, I'm going to just bring Postman into perspective here. Postman is fairly used. Postman is a online-based tool. So if you go to Postman website, just search here for it. You go to the Postman AI, you can actually, it's free, so you can register for free. I'm actually using a version of it. It's probably just going to authenticate me because I'm already in already. But technically, you can go into Postman and sign up as an individual. It's free to use, and all it is an API, a way of testing your APIs. Because when we deploy these things into Azure, we want to be able to test it. Now, I already had a flavor of it here. Let me cancel out these. I'm going to change the date to today's date because that's the deployment you just did today. It's 10/16. Hoping that is correct, because we didn't have a chance to look at the headers. The header here is, if you look at the headers I'm using, this is where we're using XAPI key. So if I go over to documentation here, you see that this chem key is being used here, and that refers to the upload file. So the documentation actually calls out what each phrase is used to and how I use it in the code base. So here we're using it here instead of here to upload the file. So I have some files I'm going to use. I got a file for testing. Got some CSV files I use for testing. Just going to open one up. Let's go to train data. See what we have here. Look at something that's pretty small. Let's take this. So what's it? Let's take a sample file here. And I'm just going to open up a notepad so you can see what we're working with here. All right. Pretty straightforward here. So this is basically company, city, state. This is a simple comma separated file we're going to be working with here. And the goal here is going to upload this file into our API endpoint. And then the whole goal is to get this into our database, right? And this could be any comma separated file. If you have a database, whether it's a Postgres database, Oracle database, and you're going to do a continuous exports, you can export the file out to a CSV continuously through a secure file transfer, and then you can actually have that data pushed out. And that's kind of what we have, continuously exporting data in bite sizes, right? So if I go into my Azure function here, I can actually browse for this file because we want to go to the body, click this, get the file, a new file. And to test our just take a small file. This is the one that we're looking at was 2 meg, right? So that's 2 meg file. All right. So what we can do in Azure is that we can go into Azure here. Look at that file. This same file here. This is the actual file we're looking at. The config file we're looking at here. Select it, and I can tweak it a little bit. And this is where the configuration of a code becomes very important in the documentation. I have some documentation around using config to drive execution of your and test of your code. So we have the concept of launch darkly. We can launch endpoints without it being able to be executed unless you turn certain things on. If you notice, a lot of things that are turned off. This is turned off. A lot of things that are turned off. So by default, nothing happened, right? So we can read this as a string. We can convert it to a JSON payload if we wanted to. So let's set this to true. I'm just going to save this. I'm going to try this out. Hit that button and see whether we get it converted over. Oops. Site can be reached. Oh, so we did have a problem with that endpoint. 404 error. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's see, training 10. Let me try that. Just want to make sure that API is not broken. Oh, so we're getting 404. So I think our deployment it wasn't as successful as expected. So let me try deploying differently. Let me try deploying it this way. Let's try deploying as a function this way so that works. Yeah, so our publishing somehow didn't work as expected from the API, even though it says it's deployed successfully. So what this is doing basically is that we're deploying it from our local machine as a backup. Let's go here. Let that open. Go to my Azure function. I don't know why that didn't work out. Interesting. Yeah, it's not showing the functions. It's all set up correctly. Yeah, this takes a little bit of time. It's just doing the outputs in the build. Nice creating it successfully as a function. So yeah, let's keep going. Should be done soon. Mm, Let's see whether we have that correctly here. Hopefully this should work, hopefully. What do we have here? Was that successful? Oh, yeah, there's an issue here. We did not isolate. Yeah, I think it's a Microsoft problem, but I'm just trying to work through it. Wants me to use .NET Isolate instead of using the out of the box capability, which is see if I can change that. It's done that for me, so I don't have to worry about it. It's all being processed, .NET Isolate. Hopefully that should work. Hmm. So we have problems. Sorry about this. Yeah, we have an issue with the deployment. Give me a second here. Let me just check things quickly. Okay, there we go. So it looks like that worked. All right, so let me go back here. Try this one more time. And hopefully we should be in business. Hopefully. 200 okay, looks good. All right, so sorry about that blip. we had. Um, I just had the wrong version of the .NET. But as you can see, the 2000 records that we just had was converted into JSON representation, right? So that's one of the key benefits of using the configuration file. So why is that turned on? A couple things. Go back to our config file just to show you. And this basically what it is that we turn it on to convert it to JSON. Then the final step is we could do some transformation as well. So if I turn this transformation on, so this is what I mean by ETL before. You could do some ETL work before you actually put in the backend system. So this is pointing to our what we call our data.liquid, and this is what does our transformation for us. So imagine if you're in a scenario where you're getting data from point A and you want to be able to make sure you're delivering to point B and it's somewhat clean. You have an opportunity here to go in, look at the data, inspect, to do some additional mapping. Maybe if you don't want the zip to look like zip here, you want it to be zip code, for example, because that's what the client wanted. If the title didn't exist, you want to say title needs to be present. There might be some additional checks and balances you want to be able to do. What you can do is that by just turning that feature on, you can actually go in and clean up the data before it ends up in the backend system. So that does a quick change. Even though it looks a little messy, you can see that actually um, I'm still working on cleaning that up, but you can see that he actually cleaned up some of the code and he came back with the actual JSON payload here. It's a little messy, but came out with the payload. But that shows that this is actually working. So if I go back to my original here, go back to the original config file.
Um, Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Where are these JSON config files, the one that you're sharing right now, created? Do we have to create each of them separately?
Yeah, I'm not sure when you joined. Okay, let me so when I'm not sure when you joined. When you joined
I
there's a
joined at the beginning. I'm just very new to it. I know you
yeah.
mentioned that there is some material about it. I can
Mhm.
take a look if you could point it to me again. But
Yeah,
uh,
so the JSON file here, so this is where the source code repository lives, right?
okay,
And the JSON file itself is located down here. And I do have documentation what each of these does. If you look here.
okay,
Yeah.
yes,
And this is very clear. It tells you what each one does and which one represents in the process. So if you look at the diagram up here, and I try to do the best I can to draw out, it tells you in each phase what the service bus is and what trigger is used to pick these files up. And then you can just go in and look at it down here. And we're still walking through it, but yeah, you're right. But I'm walking through each key and what each key represents. So right now we're focusing on this one,
okay,
what we're
yeah.
using right now, which is to upload the file into storage account. So if I go
So,
back, go ahead.
so this is the code that you showed.
Mhm.
This is what is coded in those Azure functions, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, okay. I think I'm good now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so the Azure function itself is already pre-coded. So a lot of the code I deliver here are kind of like canned code.
Hmm.
Basically what I call starter code. If you use what is Python or anything, they always give you starter codes to use. In here, we just have operations. If you use functions before, they call them operations. And
Okay.
each of these operations represents an activity or a trigger or something it's supposed to be doing. And that's basically what I'm showing you. So the first operation we're looking at is the upload file, which is basically in Postman, which is that.
Yeah,
We just
okay.
uploaded, yeah, we just uploaded a file. I just went through the process of showing you how you can use it inside of with the config file being altered without having to do any deployments. And if you're a developer, you're probably familiar that anytime you make a change to a given behavior in your application, if you don't have a configuration file that triggers a redeployment, you would have to end up redeploying the code, and you don't want to do that. So the advantage of doing this is that this config files can be deployed independently of the actual code itself with no
Mhm.
downtime.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you make a change, we make a change here, it gets saved and you can test
Yeah,
it
yeah,
in
so, yeah. So if you
Postman.
have a CI/CD pipeline, you normally would make the change in CI/CD pipeline. Then the change will get reflected here, right? So if I
Right.
wanted to turn off the I was doing some testing and I discovered that my transformation step, which is it still needs some work because it's not clean enough. I can just make this false. Sorry, make this false. Save that. And immediately if I go back to my code base and run this, there's no downtime. It actually, we start producing a different piece of data.
Okay, cool.
And this is the way of actually creating one endpoint to be able to do. There are clients that work with that use the same upload capability, but they have different orchestration configuration files because they're doing something different from what I'm doing. That transformation might be different from one client to another, but you want to maintain the same endpoint. And this is the way you do it through using something like headers with keys to redirect the data where it goes to.
Right. Okay.
Right. So once you have this data in here, now you have this in this thing. We want to be able to store the data. So now we know that we can see the data. We know the file is good, but we want to store the data in our backend system, right? So if I go back to that config file, the last piece, which is here, is to write it as a CSV file. We don't want to write it as a JSON file. We want to write it as a CSV file. So we can turn this on. And this is me just doing testing to make sure all my steps work. And this is turned off now. And this is still convert to JSON. We want to turn this off, but we want it as a flat file. And we save that. And if we go over to here and we hit send, we see, oh, okay, we have an issue here. So let's see. So this is, okay, yeah, so it says want to convert it to restricted text. I don't need that. So what I need to do, let me just turn this off for a minute. Turn this off. I want to see what's going on. Hit send here. Okay, this is what it looks like in plain text.
Okay.
So what happens is I converted it back to plain text. Now I want to send it to my backend system. So I turn this back on. And I believe turn this on as well. Just want to convert it to stream. And then what we do is send it to the backend and see whether that works. Okay, so that was successful. So what this does, it gave me coloration ID now. I created a couple of tables at the beginning of this. So, and we can leave this alone for now. Come back and visit this later on. Let's get up here and go into our storage browser here. And then if you go into our tables here, I created two tables. Now this table I originally created is to track all our connectivity to our backend system. So what this does basically just tells me how many CSV files were created in chunks of, because I broke them into manageable chunks because I moved a file that's about 1,000 records or 10,000 records in here. Then in this training folder, you have the data that we just moved. So that data we just saw in the CSV file went into our NoSQL database. So that made it successfully to here in our NoSQL database. So we can actually start using this data if you wanted to use that today, right? And if I go into our overview tab and go into our NoSQL database, SQL database, which we created earlier, and we authenticate, and we hit the connection here, create the password, authenticate. Let's see whether we made it here. So if I do select top 100 star from DBO. Yep, let's try that, see what we get. We can see data. So we know that it made it to both databases. And if you notice, I didn't have to write additional code. Now, how does data make it from one database to another is what we're going to look into next. So initially when we look at the actual documentation here, go back here, scroll up here, go back to our documentation. We have this thing in the middle called our service bus. So what happens is data landed into our function app, picked it up, put it into our container. That happened very fast because it cleans up behind itself. and then they actually put it into our service bus here. So if I go into service bus, the one thing you know is in Azure is that there's no piece of data that's not trackable. And that's one of the things that you learn very quickly in service bus instead of using Azure or even most cloud platforms. Depending on how you set it up, you can track all the traffic that leaves your system and how they behave. And so in here, if you see there's a spike here, it just tells you how many files were moved. You can drill into that if you wanted to. You can go here and you can actually drill into even more. It tells you how many files are moved. So imagine if you're doing inspecting, maybe you're running some kind of test, you need to understand the movement of your data and how often it's moving. You can actually see how it moved here. So this is a way of actually checking to see whether your files made it. And if there's any exceptions or any errors, you would see them immediately here. So you have incoming requests, 222, you have outgoing requests. So this would kind of be something you have on a dashboard somewhere, which will give you visualization into what's going on in your environment. So now you have topics here. Go in here. You can also get another way of looking at it from the subscription side of things. And then it tells you which individually, the ones you've set up, the one for NoSQL one is NoSQL, the one for SQL one is the SQL. So that shows at least the data made it to my service bus. It shows to me just visually looking at it, it shows that I made it to I've checked my SQL database, the data exists there. So the client is happy. The client is happy from that perspective, but they want to be able to retrieve the data. So that's another thing. Data going in has to come out somehow, right? So the API has the opportunity to actually do that. So the next one you can do, you can search for the data. Now the searching of the data is going to be pretty interesting because we're going to be searching two databases, right? We're going to search for data in the NoSQL database, and we're also going to search for data in the SQL database at the same time. So let me start with NoSQL. Let me keep that open. Let me come out this because I have two instances of this open anyway. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go back to the resource group. Then I'm going to click on to the into our storage account. Go into our browser and go into our table. Now this is just a simple NoSQL table instead of NoSQL database instead of a Azure table. You can use Cosmos. There's a bunch of them out there that you can use. I'm just using something that's fairly straightforward and very easy to demo. So imagine I want to just filter down. I want to be able to take something in here and filter down. This is assuming I just want to find out a company education for this company, Bridgeport Educational Inc. This is what I'm trying to filter down on. You can add a filter here, select the company. It automatically generate the fields that you have to build this because there's no SQL, and I can apply that. And I'll reduce my filter down. But what you can do is that you can actually go into the advanced tab here, switch that over, and you can grab that same endpoint, and then we can go into our API and pull that in. Let's see what it is. Just had it a minute ago. So we can go in here and we can actually paste that in here, right? Obviously, we got to update the endpoints to reflect 1016. We have to make sure we're looking at the right header. If you're in doubt, take the key, go into the documentation. I do that a lot because even though I wrote this, I actually refer to my own documentation a lot. String this. And that tells you whether you're searching for your NoSQL database, or in this case, you're searching for a SQL database. We're just working through a NoSQL database right now. So we make sure we have to use the right key. And if I do that, and the reason why you generate these keys, now these keys obviously are GUIDs, which I generated, meaning that if you're in your own business, you generate your own GUIDs to protect your own APIs because you don't want to expose without any keys. And they're almost like keys that you share with your clients, right? So if I run this here, I should get data back if everything worked correctly. Taking longer than expected, which is, yeah, there we go. We have data coming back. So we have data coming back, but if you notice it has additional information inside of this data, because this is a NoSQL database, it has role keys, it has partitions, which is necessary. These are the two mandatory things that are required if you're using a NoSQL database, because it's a key value store, and it uses partition to actually bring data back. So it asks for that. But the most important thing here is that you are getting data back from our database that we just put in like 5-10 minutes ago. We're getting data back coming out from that. Now, obviously, where it gets interesting when you start using configuration of a code is that normally when you search two separate databases, you tend to have two separate endpoints. We're not doing that today, right? So we're going to be taking this different endpoints, different key. I'm going to place that there. Now, if I search now, the API behaves differently. Something went wrong because I've introduced a key that doesn't match the actual query string that we're looking for. And that's not traditional for APIs. This is something that this process using orchestration servers, we can actually do this, right? So the thing I need to do is I need to go back into my database, which is what I'm going to do now, and grab a query that is understood by database, which is that. I'm just going to grab that, put it in here. Now, again, this is demo, so I won't recommend doing this in production environments. I'll recommend having some kind of parameterized way of collecting the data, so you don't have any SQL injection attacks or anything like that. But this is basically a demo. And what this has done is actually very interesting. It's actually gone ahead and visualized my data for me, which I didn't ask for, right? So there's something missing. So this is actually going in and visualize the data. So it's interesting. I queried my database and it gave me the data in visual aspect. So this is where that's concept of ETL and ELT, where we're doing transformation on read, and we can do extraction, transformation, and load on write. And when you get the data back, you can actually do another level of transformation. So what this has done for me is that it's transforming to HTML. But I didn't want HTML. I wanted JSON back. So what I can do is I can go and look at the actual configuration file in real time. Well, okay, did I close it already? I do. Nope, not that one. Yeah, I have this open. So I can go into my config file, go in here, look at this. And what the config file does is it's almost like a self-descriptive way of documenting things. So I come in here, I'm searching, I go to my result set back, I look at my connection string. I did get the value back in JSON, which tells me here about the transformation is using the HTML liquid template, which I mentioned to you that you can transfer data into HTML in real time if you have a template for it. That's one of the benefits of that. But what I can do is I can turn this off because I want to get the raw data back. And another thing you can do is make sure this is turned off because I don't want to show it in HTML. And what I can, then after I've done, I can go back in here and do a real-time quick query. And boom, we're back to what we're familiar with, raw JSON. So the key here is that you can actually do transformation for client on a client-to-client basis. You have 10 clients, same API, endpoints, multiple keys. Each key has its own orchestration flow. You can decide, okay, a client, 10 clients can have the same endpoints, different keys. We can present the data differently. You can even hit a different data source depending on how you're retrieving the data. So this gives the flexibility of not versioning all your APIs, especially if you have changes. So in scenarios where you have deltas, maybe you're adding new properties to a column or doing something like that in a production environment, we tend to version our code a lot, which is good, but a scenario like this, you can actually just create a new API and actually introduce that API key later on down the line when you know that you've tested it in the lower environments. So the way of actually doing what they call granular testing, where you can actually test your application without having any downtime. So now we have all this set up now. The user can search, pull data back. We get into reports later on if we have time. But the key thing there is that the client says, now I want to move real data. We just moved, I didn't even move that much data here. Let me see how much we have in here. Here's my page down. Go to the end. Oops. Oh, let's try and go to the end of this. But yeah, let's see what we have at the end of this. I think this is about 10,000 records, like I mentioned, right? So these are only 10,000 records, but I want to move bigger files. So if I go to here, and this is where the production ready environment becomes important. So let me close this out. We don't need that anymore. Let's look at data. So these are only 2 megs in size, but the files we're going to be moving here are much bigger files. We're looking at files roughly about, each of these has roughly about 1 million records in here. So this is more realistic view of what you'll be moving in a production environment. 1 million records, 2 million records, 3 million records, depending what company are above more than that. But normally in a production environment, you have a continuous feed of CSV files being pushed out from a source and is written to a disk somewhere. There's a process that picks it up and send a secure FTP back to our environment. And then we'll pick up on processing and put it into the database. That's kind of what we're seeing. What you've seen is just basically a fraction of that. So we have to build out the last piece, which is to satisfy the clients. We have to build out the last piece of the puzzle, which is I'll go back to my documentation here, which is the secure FTP piece. And then you can start moving files. So Microsoft does provide us a what I call a starter template, which I'm going to show you here. I'm just taking what they have. I'm not doing anything magical here. I'm just taking whatever I have they provided documentation on. The link is there. You guys can read up on it. It's how to create an on-demand secure FTP server with a new Azure file persistent store. This is new. I already have an existing one, so we're going to deploy with an existing one because we already have one that we provisioned in the past. We're just going to point to it. This populates a lot of the things for you. It's called a custom deployment, and you can create one yourself. This is not part of the course, but you can create what they call custom templates. Then you can then force the end user while they're provisioning that resource to provide certain things. So in this case, we're going to point to our existing resource group. We're going to keep the same name for the storage account. Oops. Training 2024 10 16. I think that's it. Make sure Mike's correctly spelled. TIT. Yeah, I believe so. And then the storage account name is the same. The actual file name we share recorded was the same. We're going to create a new password, which I'm going to be using later on. And we're going to keep the defaults there. There's some validation is going to check to make sure that at least that share exists. So anything I provide here is going to validate behind the scenes. If it doesn't exist, to blow up. So it's checked to see that I have a storage account. It knows it's there. It's going to start provisioning the actual Azure Container Instance. Now, Azure Container Instance is basically a managed instance by Azure. And they will put the operating system on there for you, and they will go and pull an image either from Docker or Azure Container Registry and put it in there. But if you have a Docker image already out there, then you just pull it from a Docker and then to install it onto the machine for you. So it's pretty straightforward, very simple to use once you have that set up correctly. And what this is doing is exposing a way for us to actually move files through a secure FTP. And that provisions pretty quickly. So if I go to the resource group, and if I go into the actual container instance, you do have a publicly available IP address. So this is the way this is the outside-inside connection, right? So far we couldn't get into our system. I always recommend take the fully qualified domain name, which is because this IP address could change, but this domain name doesn't change, right? So, and then I'm using a thing called FileZilla. I mean, everybody has their own FTP tool that you can use, but FileZilla is one of the few popular ones I know is out there. And then let me scope it in, bring it to view here. I'm going to put the username here, and I'm going to put the username TP, the password. And if you've used CQFTP, port 22 is what they use. They don't use port 21 anymore because it's more secure. And this will ask to put a fingerprint, get a handshake, which is almost like a thumbnail. And once you have that thumbnail handshake, then you're good to go. Now you can upload files. So we're moving a decent amount of files. So 1 million each of this, we're moving something around, I want to say around 3-4 million records. We're going to do that in this time span that we're on the call. And what that's doing now is uploading the files into Azure. So if I go, while that's moving, you can go into Azure. This is the server that we just provisioned that's connecting that dot. We go into our Explorer. If you go into our storage account, probably an instance open somewhere, but that doesn't matter. We go into our container. And if we go into that file share that we created that had 100 terabytes, you will see that those files are starting to get moved into our environment. So if I browse the file, see the files are there now. So if I refresh, files are getting copied over. So now we know files are getting copied over, right? So, and this process is going to take, let's see how far we're doing. These ones are still getting copied over, these are queued up. Some other ones are getting picked up and some other ones are getting dropped off, which is fine. Now we can start doing some check-in. So let's start looking at the behavior of our system, right? So first of all, I'm going to go into my function. The function is very busy right now. Some other things I can do from a telemetry or what we call monitoring perspective, assuming that you want to live check your behavior of the system. If you're on-prem, you probably have to run some kind of logger, or maybe you have to capture a piece of log. The advantage of using something like, and I won't recommend using production by any way, is that you can actually connect directly to Logger in real time and look at the behavior of the system and how the data has been moved around if you want to do that. Once it connects, you start collecting logs and you can actually start seeing the logs. So you can application insight logs is what we're looking at. Okay, let's switch into that. And if something starts getting written, normally if something's written out here, you can actually see here. They might have changed it, but if you notice things are getting written out here. Yeah. See if I can pull it up a little bit so you can see it, but I can't for some reason. But you can see that all the files again written and captured here in real time. So it tells that the behavior of my trigger is working like expected. The other thing you can do with application insights, like I mentioned to you, is that you can actually look at the behavior of the system in real time. So imagine you being able to look at your physical hardware and seeing how it's performing over time. And then the one of the things I did when I provisioned this plan is I made it elastically scalable, meaning that it will scale according to the amount of traffic that I'm receiving. So it's just spin up multiple different servers. So right now we have 3 servers running. And what this is doing here is just showing me a dashboard view of the systems, the amount of servers are running. So I have 3 physical servers running now. And this is just showing me all the dependencies. Now, if you were in a NOC or network operating center, and they had this dashboard in front of them, and you had production applications pulling in large volumes of data, they'll be looking at all the request failures and seeing how many of these are popping up here. Right now, we have none popping up because we haven't hit those limits on my service bus. Because remember, I chose a cheap service bus. Once I start hitting those thresholds, we start seeing some exceptions. But the key thing here is that if you notice, it's scaled up to 4 servers. So now it's know that more load is coming in. So it's scaling. And this is how we get data in as quickly as possible into an environment. So imagine you're in SQL and you're trying to move millions of records very quickly. This is the way you do it. If you look at our service bus, you can see that it's actually has data coming to a NoSQL SQL table. You can actually go into the service bus itself. I won't recommend doing this either in a production environment. You can peek into the next message. And then what it does is that you can actually see it's broken up into sizes. So this is actually not a million records in here. This is actually 200 records. So we sliced it into 200 records each, put it onto a service bus. If you use a service bus before it does frost in, frost out, it has sequential numbers. So the order in which it goes is the order in which it comes out. So there's no, or the first one comes out before the second one. The order of execution is actually frost in, frost out, even though we have 2 subscribers, but you can see that this is moving nicely. No issues here. If you go and look at overarching view of environments, you can see that we've increased our load here significantly. So we've gone from a blip here, which is what 200 requests. Now we're at we're taking in something like 800 requests every minute. So we're actually going up, and then this will keep climbing as far as we keep piping out more data. So we can actually see this climbing over here. So we can actually see real-time telemetry going on in here, as well as you can see the real-time queues going in here, which is pretty cool. The other thing you can do if you're doing live testing, which I always recommend, people are moving large loads, you can actually look at your SQL database and see how it's doing. Like I said, everything in Azure has telemetry information, so you can tap into certain things you wanted to. Sorry, I'm in the wrong thing. I want to go into my database. Let's go back to my resource group. Let's look at the database, see how many records we have in there. Let's see. All right, so we're going to select, let's see how our database is. Any guess how many records you think we have? CBL. All right. So we're moving records for maybe about 10 minutes. We're at over 1 million records already. So we're moving records pretty quickly. So we moved 1 million so far. Remember, everything we did up to this point, apart from the database, is free. The database, obviously, I increased it because I can increase the capacity, but you can see we still have records coming through. We can actually see the compute and storage. I'm going to leave that alone. And our compute and storage is basically where I was telling you that if we hit this, there's also telemetry here as well. So when you're using compute and storage, you're doing your testing and you're moving a lot of data, you have opportunities here to actually look at your CPU usage. You can add some more metrics information here to understand how your data is collecting. So you might be ingesting a certain amount of load on a daily basis. You want to understand what your peak limits are. And then if you decide that, okay, I'm ingesting 10 million records, 20 million records a day, you can actually come in and adjust your peaks without taking any downtime. This is another thing. So when you slide this, it will automatically keep that reducing unit, spin off new servers with the new DTUs, and then transfer the load onto that. That's what makes this pretty cool. Right. So that's one of the huge benefits of that. And still, I mean, with all this going on, you depend on what kind of APIs you have, you can see come back in here what the data is moving. And because I chose a reasonable sized DTU, I can actually come back and query my data and bring it back in here. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty straightforward. Now, the other thing that you want to look at is that now we have all this data coming through. I want to be able to do analysis. Assuming I'm doing performance testing, I have to prove that I can move X amount of records in a given amount of time. That kind of information is very hard to pull unless you have some kind of JMeter or anything like that you're using to pull that information. But what we're doing here is about capturing the ingestion rate as well. That's one of the things that we're doing here as part of the solution is that there's some KQL queries here that you could use to capture how many messages are being sent. So let me just grab this one here. I'm just going to go to query. If you haven't done quick KQL queries before, they're pretty straightforward. It's like SQL, like queries, and paste it in here. Let me run that. Oops. You know what? I'm in the wrong place. I'm in log analytics. Let's go here. Get out here. Go into this. And then go into my logs here. Similar. Simple mode. Quick QL mode. Paste that here. Select all and run this. So all this is giving us is the last 24 hours. Obviously, we haven't been running this for 24 hours. We've been running this for maybe an hour at most, right? So I want to bring it back into an hour. And what it does gives you the different kind of things that are happening. So everything you see here is tagged. This is just a tagging system I use to determine. So if I wanted to, what are the cool things about the config file? And I'm just looking at it from here. I have, it's assuming I'm looking at my code here. This is my code base here. There's a SQL database here that is used to pull, this key is used to pull the files out. And what I can do is I can actually look at the actual configuration file because everything is running through configuration file, right? So I look at the same config file and I want to know how many times I received a message inside of my SQL database, how often messages are getting ingested. And this comes out from performance, right? So they want to understand how the data is getting ingested. So you can actually filter down to just specifics, and you can actually just run that query, and it shows you basically where your ingestion times are. So you can see that if this ran all day, you can actually draw a chart that represents how often data is being ingested into your environments. Obviously, this fluctuates because of we have a service bus in between, and obviously I need to provision the most expensive ones. So I'm going to hit thresholds at some point. And you know when you hit when your service bus is getting throttled, because what happens is that there'll be a gap between the times. Right now, I'm not throttling right now because I haven't hit those limits yet. But if I keep sending data to the back end, you start throttling. And when it throttles, you get a scenario where you only have an ingestion rate which is slower than your own. So this tells me how many records I'm ingesting every minute. I mean, how many requests? And each request has 200 records. So if we take this one, which is 1,000, 8 times it, that's 200, is 200,000 here. I did over 200,000 here. Maybe I was slightly under 200,000 here, but it will even out eventually over a period of time. And as you move more data in, you know, is that the servers have gone up to 6. I can actually just, I won't advise you to do this, but I can just replay the same piece of data to force the limits in my environment. Oops, do that one more time. Oops, that's not working for some reason. Let me upload that. So I just added 3 more files in there. Take a while to upload, but the idea is that the server rates are going up here. You can see that my durations are slower. We're not using a lot of CPU. We're starting to see some exceptions. And those exceptions because I'm starting to hit those thresholds, or what do you call, I'm getting throttled by the service bus. And that's the reason why you're seeing my messages coming out from this side in here. So it's going to be, I'm getting throttled here. That's what I'm seeing the messages here. One more thing before I close out. I know we're past time. I just wanted to quickly go over one of the benefits of using something like application insights. Now, if you use application insights with any kind of function app or any kind of serverless solution, they have a way of actually monitoring the behavior of the APIs and the endpoints they've used, which is pretty cool. It tells you how many files, how many times it's triggered. It tells you what the duration was. This is something that you always look out for when you're doing any kind of testing to ensure that, okay, how much data has been ingested during my transformation process. So it's not just about taking data in, it's about making sure that the data you're ingesting is running a specific amount of time. So the business can understand how much data they can hand over to you so you can upload it to your backend system, including transformation, right? And what this does is that you can actually go into a breakdown of the latency that took between each of these calls. So it's not just about um, ingesting the data, is understanding the latency it takes between one end-to-end calls. So from a reporting standpoint or from a Power BI standpoint, you can actually pull this information out and present that on the Power BI to tell them, okay, my ingestion rates are this and they're real-time data. And if you have any bottlenecks, you can actually set alerts to ensure that if your ingestion rate goes on a certain amount in terms of threshold, you can send out alerts to actually set it up. So this becomes almost like a self-managed solution. And then the numbers normally match the blob trigger, the NoSQL trigger, they're kind of close. The closer they are, the better, because what that means is that you're not losing any records, right? So the NoSQL and the SQL are matching up, meaning that I can confidently say I haven't lost any messages because they're getting delivered both to both consumers. And there's nothing that's in my dead letter queue. Just by eyeballing that, I can actually see that information without having to dig deeper into it. So this is one of the cool benefits there. What else am I going to cover? I think that's really it. Do you guys have any more questions around the solution? And I would encourage you to actually, this is actually a very good way to get into Azure. It's like taking a real reuse case, as challenging as it is, taking a real use case, going through the process, putting some real data through it, testing it out on making sure that it's working versus just spinning up something in Azure and just find a use case. And mostly data is something that most people are interested in showing. So it's a way of actually using this to actually push data in. All right, so that's all I have to share. I believe we're at time. If you guys have no other questions, I'm gonna end the call.
Thank you.
Thank you
It
guys for
was
joining.
sure.
By the way, the recording of this is going to be available in the next couple of days. I'm going to make sure I put it up this time. So if you missed anything here, you can just go back to the recording and just pull it out and follow through and see what you think.
Sure. So I just have one question. Like I said, mentioned before, I'm new to Azure.
Mhm.
Still, this demo was great. I think I just need to revise it too. Should
Okay.
I go through your prior sessions? I see the ones which are from
Yeah,
Q2.
the prior sessions are similar to this session. Is I just record them as I go along, and if I look at a recording and it seems one is better than the other, I put it. But they're kind of similar.
Oh, okay.
So if you go through a previous session, it walks you through what I've done. The advantage of the recording is that you can pause it and go through a step, pause it, go back and
Yeah.
take a while. But once you get through, you should have an end product like what I have here, and you should be able to demo that in your own subscription.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. I'll wait for the recording.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you everybody for joining. Hope to see you guys next time.
Sure. Bye-bye. Good
Hi,
night.
this is Abina.
Yes.
Oh, I'm late at 10 minutes. So, is
Mhm.
there anything we can, how we get that GitHub from your document, everything?
Yeah, I put it in the chat at the beginning.
You put in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat there. You should say in the
Okay,
chat.
let me look at it.
Yeah, it should be in
Okay.
yeah, that should have all documentation and the source code. And then
Oh, okay.
I'll have the video up, and it should have previous recordings, and also I'll have this video up in the next day or two.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well,
It's
thank you.
great.
Make sure you grab the link before we end the calls, because that
Oh,
way.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't see the link on the chat window right now.
Then let me send it one more time.
Oh, okay. And you did a very great presentation.
Thank
It's
you.
really great.
Thank you. Just give
Okay.
me some. You make sure you go in and give me a good review.
Okay, let me copy that one and then I will let you know. Give me 1 second.
You got it? Let me know when
Yeah,
you
I
have.
got it. Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay, so try and go
Yeah.
through that. I mean, if you're new to Azure, this is actually a very good way to get onboarded. It's slightly more technical, but it gives you hands-on
Oh,
knowledge on how to use Azure in the cloud.
okay. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good
All right.
night.
All right. Good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.